something over Shabbos, just thought about this. On Shabbos, we have Psuki de Zimra, as we have Psuki Zimra during the week. Before we come to the blessings of the Shema, and the Shema itself, that part of the morning service is called Psuki de Zimra, verses of praise. And we cite many chapters from Tehillim, which was authored by David, which he expresses his praise of Hashem, and he articulates it in a context which is so succinct and so clear, and exactly how he internalized the awesomeness and the power and all that a human being could understand about God. That's what Tehillim is about. And there were other certain insertions which the men of the High Assembly also contributed to this. In any area of life, to have any level of understanding or expertise, you have to study it, you have to have an orientation, you have to be mentored. If, let's say, all we would have and all we would know, God is the creator of the universe, God is infinite, and God wills existence, which is what we say in every blessing before we eat, blessings of praise, whatever it may be. But that's what we know about God. He's the creator. What does creator mean? He's the king. He's the king. And this king says to us, we're bound to his will. But why should we bow to his will? Because he's king, because he's creator. But how we touched in a way to appreciate what that means, that we should totally, not only against our will, submit, but we should feel privileged to submit because we have an understanding who this king is, who this creator is, and who this infinite being is. Psuki de Zimra, let's see, during the week, we have the verses of praise. And the Psuki de Zimra, this section in the morning service during the week is much shorter than the Shabbos service. The Shabbos service, it's a longer service, just this section. So the Ramchal writes in one location, why is the Shabbos Psuki de Zimra? We have many more insertions, chapters of Tehillim than during the week. A very significant amount of the Tehillim which is inserted in the Psuki de Zimra, we don't say during the week, but Shabbos we do say it. Why? So Ramchal explains it this way. What is Shabbos? The holiest day of the year is Shabbos. Why is Shabbos the holiest day of the year? The seventh day of the week, even pre-mankind, before there was a Jewish people, only when there was only Adam and Eve, Shabbos already had that same sanctity then as it has today. What is the basis for Shabbos? For the sanctity of Shabbos, the holiest day of the year. So the Midrash tells us that the initial intent of creation was that God should be on the terrestrial level. God only entered into the terrestrial level only when it was complete. When was the world complete? After 6 days, in terms of its physicality and its spiritual counterparts, where it was complete. What was lacking? What was lacking was God's entry into this existence. God entered into this existence on the seventh day of creation, and that actually energized and caused existence to function to its fullest capacity, because God's presence is the basis for all existence at every level. So because God's presence entered into this existence on the seventh day, because of that, and God is infinitely precious, holy on his level unto himself, his association with existence spiritualized existence to be the holiest day for that reason. This is unrelated to the Jewish people existing or not existing. That's why Shabbos is the holiest day. What happens Saturday night? God ascends from this existence. And therefore, the weekdays are called ordinary. They're not holy days. The Shabbos is called holy, Shabbos Kodesh, the holy Sabbath. Therefore, in the first of the 10 commandments, what do we say? Positive commandment, that's what we say, Kiddush Friday night. Zocher es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho. Remember the Shabbos to sanctify it. How do we sanctify it? By saying that paragraph of the Torah that speaks about God completing creation on the seventh day, and he rested. That's the declaration which we say on that cup of wine. That's a positive commandment. In the second commandments, there's a negative commandment that a Jew is not permitted to do creative activity on the seventh day of the week. Because just as God ceased at the end of the sixth day from being creative, we being his people, we have to cease, we have to refrain from creative activity on the seventh day. But that's in conjunction with God being the creator. So why do we have a more lengthy Psuki de Zimra? We say many more Psalms on the Shabbos than during the weekday. So first we've differentiated. Weekday doesn't have the sanctity of the Shabbos, doesn't have sanctity at all. Because God is not present on the terrestrial level. Shabbos, God enters into the terrestrial level. As a result of that, it's another dimension of what? Of holiness. We as Jews, we are beneficiaries of that holiness. We can be beneficiaries of that holiness. But you have to be worthy to be a beneficiary of that holiness, to be sanctified. What do you have to do? You have to appreciate it. You have to recognize it. So Shabbos, because there's so much more of this available holiness, the presence of God generates a level of holiness which is unfathomable. We could be beneficiaries of that. But we could only be beneficiaries of it if we esteem and revere God himself to appreciate what his presence is. So therefore, the men of the High Assembly, when they structured the protocol of prayer on Shabbos, it's different than during the weekday. We say many more Psalms, many more chapters of Psalms. Because when we say the chapters of Psalms, what are we saying? We're articulating who God is and what his value is, and to the degree that we esteem him and we revere him and we value him. And because we revere him and we esteem him, and we're more expressive on Shabbos than during the weekday, therefore we have a greater worthiness to be beneficiaries of that light, of those energies, which exist on Shabbos, which don't exist during the weekday. Those energies don't exist on the terrestrial level during the weekday because God's presence is not present during the weekday. That's what weekday is called ordinary. It's called chol. Chol means ordinary. Kodesh means consecrated. So we say the additional Psalms on Shabbos to be greater beneficiaries of what's available on Shabbos. During the weekday where that's not available, whatever is available, because God releases these energies every day, these energies of holiness, you have to say the amount that we say, to acknowledge him with the chapters of Psalms that we do say. But what does this all say? To be a beneficiary of a relation with God, it's determined to what degree do you appreciate who he is. You have to know who he is. It's not only he's the creator. You say just the Ashrei Psalm, which is an acrostic according to the Aleph-based, the Hebrew alphabet. Each phrase, each sentence, the 5 halukos, hallelujah, praise is Ko, which is the name of God. We say 5. And each one has another level of representation, expression of praise. It's so delineated and so articulated and so specific. David doesn't need not an iota, a nuance of who God is relating to this existence. And we say it. So based on the degree that we relate to that and we eternalize it and we're touched by that, that will determine to what degree we'll be beneficiaries of whatever those energies are, to be worthy. The Chavetz Chaim in his work, Mishnah Berurah, which is halachic work, says the reason why we say the Psuki de Zimra, these verses of Psalms, before the Shema, because ultimately, what is the supplication? The supplication is the Amidah. We ask God for many things. To be worthy that he should respond and give us what we ask him for, we need a worthiness. What gives us that worthiness? What activates the ultimate level of the attribute of Rahmah, of mercy, that God should be merciful and respond to our requests? It's the Psuka de Zimra. Because if God says, if my children, they esteem me and revere me, and they understand who I am, by articulating all the various verses of David, which is Psalms, which are the praises of God, and that's what it's called, Psuki de Zimra, verses of praise, then that causes that we should be worthy of what? Of that level of mercy. So based on the degree that you're touched by it, that will determine the degree that you can be worthy, to what degree God will respond during the Amidah when we make our supplications and we make our requests of God. This is the understanding. So what touched me on Shabbos, I was saying the Psuki de Zimra, and we say it, the more lengthy one. 26 kilolam chesed, forever is God's chesed. And we articulate every one of those reasons why it's an expression of God's unending chesed, indiscriminate kindness. We get to know a little bit who God is. Who is God? God is not only A through Z. He's not only Aleph to Tuf. Each letter has many levels of representing who he is. I'll give you an example. Today's a fast day. So on the fast day, we say slichos. We say things which allow us to introspect, to do tshuva, to repent. And we confess verbally. The same confession we say on Yom Kippur, we say today on a fast day. And the confession is based on the Aleph base. For each letter of the Hebrew alphabet, we say another word. Oshamnu, we're guilty. Bogadnu, we betrayed you. Gozalnu, we stole. We spoke things we shouldn't have spoken. But that letter, when we say we are guilty, it's very, in general, guilty. Guilty for what? So that is only the category, guilt. Now you begin to articulate it. We can be guilty and we express it, we articulate it. We're guilty because we ate not for the sake of God. We ate as gluttons. We ate without a blessing. We ate things that we shouldn't eat because they didn't conform with dietary laws. So the letter represents a concept, a category, a classification. But why do we fit into that classification? That's the idea. So the words of the Tehillim, David's expression of what? Of his understanding of God. King David was a prophet. He was spiritual, he was divinely inspired. Plus many, many, many other levels which we can't even fathom who David was. David Melech Shel Chai V'Kayom, he's the eternal king. There was no king like King David. Refer to the Messiah, Mashiach ben David. The Messiah will be the son of David. He will ultimately represent God when all evil be purged from this world. And we say his words. He's known as the psalmist. We get to know him. Through him, we have a sense and understanding based on each person's capacity, who God is. There's a familiarity with God. Give you an example. Person can download medical information. Is that going to make him a doctor? You know, he has to be taught. He has to be explained. He has to see on hands. He has to have an orientation. He has to have a residency. He has to have a level of experience. And once he becomes a doctor, over years of experience, he has a sense. So the longer you're involved and the broader and deeper and the better the quality education you have, the more you have an understanding of what it is and how to deal with the issues. How do we know who God is? To have a sense of personalization. Almighty. There's nothing you can do. You know, if you have a bill, you can be dispossessed, he'll pay your mortgage. That's the context of God is. Do you know the volcano that erupted, in Rhodes, and there was no grease left? Whatever it is, God did that. That gives a sense of who God was. God split the sea. Do you understand who God is? By saying God split the sea. But if you go and you read the words of David, who related to it as what? As a human being, not only as a prophet. The prophet was articulating reality, which only the prophet knows, but he's able to share with us the inner secrets of what you wouldn't know on your own. The example I always give, Ramosha Feinstein, Zecher Tzaddik Levrocha, passed away about 35, 40 years ago. He was a leading Torah decider in the world. He knew the Talmud backwards and forwards. He had it on his finger, instant recall. He was a master in Torah. If you'd see him walking on the street, he was 5 feet tall. He had a white beard, wore a black kaftan, wore a Hamburg, and he looked humble and meek, not to be compared to. And say, see this little man? He is a giant. He is this, he is that. You say, I understand what you're saying. But based on your understanding, and he knows the whole Torah's entirety, and you don't even know what the word Torah means, and you don't even know what the sizer means. Well, is he a Torah scholar? I heard, I once heard a scholar residence, at some uptown, Upper East Side synagogue. Does he fit that classification? You have to have a relationship, an exposure, or you have to have relevance to what he knows to even appreciate what he knows. When we say the Psuki de Zimro, and we study it and we understand the words, then you're touched by those words. Now when it comes to the Shema, to the blessings of the Shema, when we accept the dominion of God, we're submitting to his will. We're accepting his dominion. We're willing to give our lives for him. For who? If you understand who he is, because we've just articulated extensively during the verses of praise, prior to the section of the Shema, that's the perfect. Not only does it give us worthiness and merit that God should, regardless of our shortcomings, he should have mercy on us. It gives us a sense of who we're accepting. Whose kingship are we accepting? What are we submitting to? It's not a tyrant, a despot, but to the contrary. If God is infinite, God doesn't need this existence. God is perfect on the absolute level. Automatically, what does that bring to mind? This is chesed. Olam chesed yiboneh. That's the only answer. And that's what David says in Tehillim, in Psalms. The basis for creation is what? Is chesed, is indiscriminate kindness, because God doesn't need it. God is perfect and absolute. You can't add to God, you can't detract from him. So why is he doing it? Selfless kindness, so mankind should be beneficiaries of the ultimate benefit. That if they succeed, they will become part of, be exposed to who he is. And he is good on the absolute level, we can all be beneficiaries of that goodness. If we succeed at the opportunity presents to us. But the reason why I presented that opportunity is only that we should be beneficiaries of that absolute goodness. That's the understanding. There's a story, the Nitziv, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin. Volozhin was the famous Lithuanian yeshiva which produced all the great Torah leaders of the 19th century and into even the earlier part of the 20th century. The Nitziv was the grandfather of Chaim Soloveitchik. Chaim Soloveitchik, who was the the methodology of analysis till today, throughout the world, when you study Torah, it's with the analysis of Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. He's known as Rav Chaim Brisker. Rav Chaim Brisker was married to the Nitziv's granddaughter. But the Nitziv was Rosh Yeshiva Volozhin. And during the Nitziv's life, the Russian government shut down the Volozhin Yeshiva because they would not teach secular subjects in Volozhin, in the yeshiva. And he said, if they're going to impose secular studies, which will be infringement, and it will dilute the Torah, we shut down the yeshiva. And then Tziv writes in a letter, and he moved from Volozhin, which was a city in small town in Lithuania, he moved to Warsaw. And there's a cemetery in Warsaw, and the Tziv is buried in that cemetery. And Reb Chaim is buried in that cemetery in Warsaw. And the Tziv writes that if I would have to, he says, I'm dying today on my deathbed because of the pain and aggravation I had, that I had to shut down the Volozhin Yeshiva, because I would not allow secular studies to become part of the curriculum. And he says, if I would have to do it again, I would do the same thing. Because to dilute Torah, that it should not be pristine and pure, it pays to close it down and not to allow it to be diluted with impurity. And therefore, I would do it again. Isn't the Nitziv? The Nitziv himself passed away. He was an old person. He was close to 90 years old. And he had his youngest son. His youngest son changed his name. His name was Berlin. Naftali Tzvi Berlin. He became one of the great Zionists, religious Zionists in Europe, and he changed his name to Bar Ilan. Bar Ilan University is named after the Nitziv's youngest son. But when the Nitzivs had his youngest son, the Nitziv was already an older man. Nitziv had older children who are literally the leading Torah sages of the generation. For instance, one of his sons was Rav Chaim Berlin. Rav Chaim Berlin, the yeshiva in Brooklyn called Chaim Berlin, is named after Nitziv's son. He was one of the leading Torah sages, much older, could have been 30 years older than his youngest brother. So as a result of that, the Nitziv, of course, he raised him as a father raising a child, but he passed away. His youngest child didn't really know his father. He wasn't mentored by his father, okay? Fast forward a little bit. Bar Ilan comes to the Chofetz Chaim for a blessing. And the Chofetz Chaim, it was known, if he would give a blessing, it wasn't so simple he would be agreeable to give the blessing, but if he would give a blessing, the blessing always came to fruition, as the Chofetz Chaim would say it. And therefore, he was very careful who to give it to and not to give it to. Because sometimes a person receives a blessing, he misuses the blessing, it's not good. So the Tzid came, the Bar Ilan comes to the Chofetz Chaim for a blessing. There's a backdrop on this. In Poland, the Polish government was very anti-Semitic, and they wanted that in the elementary schools, when they were teaching the Torah curriculum, they should also teach Polish and teach secular subjects to the children on the elementary education. And they were adamant, the Polish government. And the Chofetz Chaim was opposed to it. Similar to what happened in Volozhin, except Volozhin, they were older, but this was at the younger level. And it would be, in Europe, there was a thing called gymnasium. Gymnasium, any Jew went to gymnasium, ultimately, he gave up his Judaism. Because due to the influence of the acculturation of being exposed to what that was, the secular aspects of society, it actually undermined the level of Torah observance. All the Enlightenment people who represented the Enlightenment movement, they went to gymnasium. Judaism means secular, they had secular studies, but it was mainly secular, with some sprinkling of Hebrew, grammar, this kind of thing, okay? So the Chafetz Chaim says, and the Minister of Education in Poland was not going to back down under any circumstance. Either you have the secular studies in the elementary schools, or we don't allow you to have the elementary schools. And would force you to send your children to the secular public schools, whatever the secular education was. Chafetz Chaim already was an old man. Chafetz Chaim lived till 98 years old. Chafetz Chaim at this time was in his 90s. And the Chafetz Chaim says to his family, he's traveling to Warsaw to meet with the Minister of Education. And it was in the winter. And his family says, we're not going to let you go. You're putting your life in jeopardy because your health is you're so infirm. You catch a cold or whatever it is, it could end your life. Chafetz Chaim said, I will go regardless, because it's a question of Shas Hashmad. Whenever there's a decree by the government which will undermine Judaism, a Jew has an obligation to give his life. He says, I will go to Warsaw to meet the Minister of Education, even if it means that they will decapitate me. I'm willing to go to give my life. And when he said this to his family, they understood it. Chafetz Chaim is not backing down. And he went to Warsaw. And he spoke to the Polish Minister of Education. And he says to him, Chafetz Chaim speaks Yiddish. The Polish minister doesn't understand the word of Yiddish. He's a rabid anti-Semite. And the question is, what level of attention will he pay? So they had an interpreter. So when he saw the Chafetz Chaim, the interpreter was there, and the Chafetz Chaim starts speaking in Yiddish, very strong. And he says to the Polish Minister of Education, this is the heartbeat of the Jewish people, our religion, which is the Torah. And if you in any way tamper with that, it will not be good for you people. And he explained to him why. We're an asset if we function as Jews. And if we assimilate, not only is it not beneficial, it's detrimental for the society. Not only for the Jews. Therefore, he's asking of the minister to annul this decree and leave the Jewish education be pristine, no level of any other level of influence, and it should be determined by the leading rabbis, what the curriculum should be. And as much as the interpreter wanted to interpret the Chafetz Chaim's words, because he was going to interpret it from Yiddish into Polish, the Minister of Education says, just kept silence, don't interpret. Didn't want an interpretation. At the end of the meeting, the Minister of Education says, I will annul the decree. That's what he said in Polish. Chafetz Chaim understood Polish. I will annul the decree. So they said to the minister, if the interpreter didn't interpret the words of Chafetz Chaim when he spoke in Yiddish, and you didn't understand one word he said, why did his presentation of request, why was the basis for the annulment of the decree? So the Polish minister says, there are two types of languages. There's the language of the mouth, and there's the language of the heart. So when this holy rabbi spoke to me, he spoke to me with the language of the heart. And my heart understood his heart. And that's why I know the decree. That's what he explained to the people there. And he says, therefore, he didn't need any interpreter. Because for the language of the heart, you don't need an interpreter. And ultimately, the Jewish education, despite the anti-Semitic government, remained wholesome, pure, and pristine. Okay? Now, in Europe, the parliament in Poland was called the Sejm. S-E-J-M. That's what it's pronounced, Sejm. And in parliament, they had representation of the Jewish people. They had members of parliament were Jews. Meir Shapiro, the founder of the Daf Yomi, who was known as the chief rabbi of Lublin, who founded the yeshiva in Lublin, known as the Chachmei Lublin, he was a member of parliament. And he represented in the government Agudas Yisrael. In the government, in the parliament, there was a representation of Mizrahi, which was the Zionistic representation. Okay? Bar Ilan was a member of parliament representing Mizrahi. And before the Chofetz Chaim went to the Minister of Education, they were going to vote. They were going to take a vote. Will they have secular education in the Jewish schools or not? And it was going to be put up for vote. Mizrahi said that we have to go and we have to compromise. Because if we don't compromise, you know what's going to happen? They're not going to allow us to have Jewish schools whatsoever. Therefore, we have to show them we're flexible. Agudas Yisrael, which was overseen by the Netziv and by Rav Chaim Brisker and by Rav Chaim Ozer, all the great Torah sages, they say, we don't back down. The end result is up to God. We don't back down. Mizrahi says, no, we disagree with you. We have to make compromises. We have to be flexible. Ultimately, it happened. They did not touch it because of what happened with the Chofetz Chaim. Okay? Now we're ready for the engagement between Bar Ilan and the Chofetz Chaim. So Bar Ilan comes to the Chofetz Chaim for a blessing. And the Netziv already passed away. His father wasn't alive any longer. And he's the youngest son of his father. So the Chofetz Chaim says to the Netziv, to Bar Ilan, did you know your father? Did you know your father? This is the beginning of the conversation. Of course I knew my father loved me. He would dress me in the morning. He would put me in bed at night. He showed exceptional love for me. He says, I understand, but did you know your father? He says, you didn't know your father. When it came to the vote of secular education in Volozhin, he shut down Volozhin. And your father writes in the letter, he died from the pain of closing it. He's on a sickbed and dying, and if he'd have to do it again, he'd do it again. That's how opposed he was that. He wasn't willing to make any compromises. That was your father that you did not know. Of course, if you did know who he was, you wouldn't represent the Mizrahi to compromise Jewish education and vote with the Polish government. And as you see, we succeeded. The Jewish education remained pristine, uncompromised, unadulterated Torah. And therefore, Chofetz Chaim laced it into him and dismissed him. He would not give him a blessing. Did you know your father? Of course, he loved me. My DNA is his. He served me breakfast every morning. He paid for my clothing. We used to sit at the table. We used to sing Zmiris together. You know? But that's not knowing your father. God, he's the creator. He wills creation. He's merciful. He's indiscriminately kind. But who is he? Unless you read the words of David, who's the psalmist, and you say Psuki de Zimra, you say those verses of praise, you have no sense who God is. And as you mature, as you appreciate what life's all about, that we all believe, you're endowed with good health, you have a phenomenal mind, you have a phenomenal personality, you have a charisma, you have all the connections in the world. You have it made for life. As you realize and you experience life, it's not that simple. You need other things also. And success is more than just succeeding financially. Success is in the mind, in the emotion, of accomplishment and contentment. That's all part of it. And to be touched in a certain way. You can only have that if you connect it to God. But how do you connect? Study Torah. But I had even appreciation for what Torah is. Of course, you have to have a teacher, but you still have to understand who God is face to face within our capacity. In the morning, we say blessings of the morning. We thank God that we're Jews. We thank God we're not a slave. We thank God that we can open our eyes and see in the morning. We thank God that that we're able to sit up. We could stand up, that we could walk. And we thank God for so many things, which normally you take for granted. A person's healthy and he goes to sleep and you wake up, we expect to wake up. When we open our eyes, we expect to be able to see. We take everything for granted. When we start praying in the morning and we express many things, blessings of thanks, of praise, verses of praise, it's a whole different reality. Nothing is for granted. Everything happens because. There's a because behind everything. Because God is praiseworthy. Hallelujah. For A through Z, and say it over another 1,000 times. With nuances of what that is. And as they say, the more learned you are, the more mature you are, and the more humble you are, the more you're touched by this. And if you're touched by that and you have a greater capacity to internalize that, when you come to say the Shema, and you say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, to accept his dominion, to submit to his will, even to give your life for this Almighty, it's a whole different reality. Because you know what you're talking about. You know, many years ago, I had some cabinets made in my laundry room, and the cabinet person was an Italian, came from Orange County. And he's a very nice person. And all of a sudden, he wants to show me what he knows. And he had a baritone voice. And he sings, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, but saying the name of God. As you know, I said to him, how do you know that? He says, I was a choir boy in a synagogue that for the high holidays and Saturdays, they used to pay me to come and I used to sing it. This is what he tells me. I said, you know, you have a beautiful voice. I said, you say it with such feeling. He says, yeah. He said, that's why I was a star. And they paid me every Saturday when I'd show up to be part of the choir. You know, you get a parrot, and the parrot can parrot the words exactly. And he sounds like Abi Ibn, you know, at the UN, the orator with the South African accent. Psh, this parrot must be worth a fortune. And you don't have to feed him the way you fed Abi Ibn. Abi Ibn you took a look at him, what he looked like. Physically, he was a massive person. When do those words take on a whole different meaning? It's not what comes out of your mouth, it's what's behind the words. But how do you have what's behind the words? Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, Ho-Yehoviyah, God is infinite, God is almighty, God is one, God is infinite. How do you even relate to those concepts? As he said, you never met the man before. How do you even know what you're talking about? Well, I heard about it. It's a whole different reality. This is what I was touched this Shabbos when I was saying the Psukei de Zimra. You know, you say Kel Adon on Shabbos, and you speak about the luminaries, how the luminaries, the sun, the moon, and the angels, how they sing God's praises. You know what this is? So these luminaries, they sing his praises in the way they express themselves. We're talking about angels. So who are we? To what degree should we sing his praises? The angels were created for a function. We were created to write our own ticket. And we can write our own ticket. You want to go and soar beyond existence. It's within the stars. You can do that. You want to go to steeplechase in Coney Island or somewhere else off the cliff, you can go there also. God allows you to write the ticket the way you want to write the ticket. And he will assist you. He will fund you. He'll back you. That's what it's all about. So the question is, why should I invest my ability, my creativity, my intellect, my emotion, everything, and put it in the right basket? Because I understand what the right basket is. Because I understand what that basket represents. And the more you understand what that basket represents, the more you want to be associated with that basket and the one who's behind that basket. We even say, David says, a tzaddik doesn't have it easy. No, there's an expression in English, no pain, no gain. That's a reality. Things don't happen by themselves. You think you go to a slot machine, you put in your coin, and you pull the lever, $1 million falls out of the machine. That's not the way it happens. And if it happens that way, it's like giving an alcoholic all he wants to drink, he will drink himself to death. The person, if it comes in that manner, it's literally the ticket to that person's demise. Because you have to appreciate the value of that to be able to use it responsibly. And that it should have value to you and not to abuse it and you become the victim of that abuse. That's what it is. Okay, we're going to start the Shema now. All this is introduction. I mentioned that in the Shema itself, the 3 paragraphs we say, the first paragraph is referred to as Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shamayim, accepting the yoke of heaven. The second paragraph is referred to as accepting the yoke of mitzvos, of the dictates of the Torah. The third paragraph is the paragraph of tzitzis we mentioned, but the reason why we say it because there's an obligation on the Jew twice a day, in the evening and the morning, to mention the redemption from Egypt. And since the third paragraph has the mention that God took us out of Egypt, therefore we mentioned the third paragraph. So I mentioned this, it's worthwhile repeating. When you speak about a yoke, what is conjured in the person's mind? What do we visualize? Something which is heavy, something which is overwhelming, something that when you put it on your shoulders, you stoop from it. You weight it down. If that's the way one visualizes and sees it, accept the yoke, it's worth it. For the next 70 years, you'll be bent over, touching the ground. That's what kind of yoke it is. But you realize after 70 years what you're going to have. So you say, I should live a life of misery and deprivation and pain and suffering. What's going to happen after 70 years? You know something? I'm not sure I'm interested in that because I'm not even sure what happens after 70 years. So for me to enter into that kind of agreement, I'm not sure I want it. Is it worth it? So Chaim Volozhin explains the word yoke doesn't mean that. It's a misperception of the reality of what the yoke of heaven is. That's not what a yoke means. When you put a yoke on an animal, and I explained this, when the yoke is on the animal's shoulders, its head is basically like in a vise. It cannot turn its head not to the right or to the left as much as an iota. It sees a straight line. Why does the ox have to see that straight line? Or the animal that you plow with? Because the plow in the ancient days was a blade that went into the ground about the depth of a foot into the ground. And the farmer, when he would be behind the plow with that animal, it would pull the plow and had to pull it in a straight line. Because if it would go veer to the right or to the left, the blade would break in the ground. So it would only tear the ground, which is plowing, if it went in a straight line. So what does the yoke allow and bring about? That the ox can't look to the side, because the moment it looks to the side, it veers to the side, to the left or to the right, even slightly. But that's enough to break the plow. So he puts the yoke, that the yoke The animal only sees that straight line in the direction it has to go. Accepting the yoke of heaven means you have a level of clarity that you have no distraction. I'm committed to your will. Everything else has no value versus that. I'm singularly focused. That's the commitment. It has nothing to do with deprivation, it has nothing to do with pain, it has nothing to do with anything. Other than I accept your protocol and not to value other things. And when you enter into that mindset, you have every level of what? Of contentment, and you can weather every storm because you understand who stands behind you. Avraham Avinu, Abraham introduced God to existence. And what did he have to experience until humanity recognized who he was and he was proclaimed the Prince of God? He went through thick and thin. He went into a kiln. He went to battle with the four mightiest kings of the world. He came out on top. He had wealth of one of a kind. He went to Egypt, impoverished, comes back from Egypt, lad with wealth, not to be believed what kind of wealth he had. You know, the Talmud tells us that in the ancient days, like today, you go to a dermatologist, it's called a skin peel. They put certain acid on the skin and it peels off the top layers. And now the new skin that grows is healthy looking, more attractive. So in the olden days, they had such a thing. What would they do? They would take dough with other ingredients in it, and they would make a face mask made out of dough. And the dough would draw the blood to the surface. And the woman would wear this. And then afterwards, she would be, when you remove it, she'd be in slight pain. She'd be irritated from this face mask. But ultimately, she'd look very presentable and even beautiful. As they say, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. She looks in the mirror, she thinks she's, okay. So the question is, are you permitted to do this on Yom Tif? Because on Chol Hamoed, the intermediate, because you're causing yourself pain. You're going to be in a painful situation. Even though ultimately you're going to look better, but are you permitted to be in this deprived state or painful state for ultimately to be in a better looking state? So the Talmud says a person is a gourmet chef. And it takes him 8 hours to prepare the meal. And how long does it take to eat that food? In a half an hour, it's gone. So here you toil and you make tremendous efforts and time expended to prepare the 8 hours of preparation. Whether it's the grinding, the cooking, the mixing, and this and that, whatever, the forming. And the people, eat in a half an hour, it's all gone. So you see, but that's not called pain. Because since you have the ultimate value at the end, the effort is not called pain. Even though the person is experiencing toil, but toil which has purpose is not called pain. Life is toil. But if it has purpose and value, as much as you're deprived, you don't see it as deprivation. So if you understand what ultimately you have the Ol Malchus Shamayim, you see that single, you see from the beginning till the end. And you see exactly what the value of that is. Not to be distracted. In life, the main thing in life is focus. If you focus, you can appreciate something. You're distracted, you don't appreciate. So the Ol Malchus Shamayim, the yoke of heaven makes it, I'm not distracted. If I'm not distracted, I could appreciate every moment of my investment because I see exactly who I'm serving and what the value of that service is and what way it's impacting my life. That I'm a person who towers above all humanity because of that. There's no question. You know, it's interesting. In this past week's parsha, Bilam came to curse the Jewish people. And he said, Mimon Afa Yaakov. So Rashi cites the Midrash. He says, there are multiple mitzvos, this is Bilam saying, which have to do with the earth. A Jew is not permitted to plow with two species in his field. You have Ephah Porah. You have the ash of the red heifer. You have the dust that's put into the ritual of the sota, the suspected adulteress. All of a sudden, they take the dust, worthlessness, and they have mitzvahs. And this is what Bilam is saying. Whoever heard of such a thing? Dust, dirt should be mitzvahs. You got it. What do we value? Humility is an exceptional trait, characteristic. Humble. You know, years ago, Dershowitz wrote a book. It was called Chutzpah. How do you get ahead in life? Chutzpah. Arrogant. Be there in the other guy's face. Maybe that's what Dershowitz says. God says differently. Humility. Mount Sinai was chosen to be the location of giving the Torah because it was the smallest mountain. And did not put itself forth, I should be the appropriate location. God says, because you were humble, therefore you will be the location for the giving of Torah. For all existence value. Humility is crucial. Dust, ash, which has no value. That's exactly what these are the mitzvos. That generates eternity. Schar b'al maleko. There's no reward in this world. For that dirt, you can have all the gold and silver and platinum in the world. What that dirt is worth, in that context, there's nothing equivalent of that. Bilam was amazed. Something which is worthless all of a sudden has the ultimate worth, the infinite worth. You know, the story, there was a person, his name was Nochum. Nochum was the Rebbe of Rabbi Akiva. And he was known as Nochum Ish Gamzu. He was Nochum, the man of Gamzu. Why was he called Gamzu? All of this was anything that happened in his life, he always said Gamzu L'Tova. It's for the best. So the Talmud tells a story that there was a decree against the Jews which literally would have crippled us. It would have infringed on our observance of Torah. So they said, I think we have to send Nochem Ish Gamzu, he has to go to Rome. And he has to plead the case of the Jews to have the decree annulled. And why him? Because he's Melumed B'Nisim, because he's well-versed in miracles. He's a miracle person. He lived his life, he experienced miracles nobody else experienced. So we need a person who should merit a miracle. So we're sending Nochem Ish Gamzu. The man, Gamzu L'Tov, was sending him to Rome. Said he get a beautiful wooden chest. They fill it with diamonds and jewels and gold and silver. And when he comes to the Roman emperor, who presented before the Roman emperor, and hopefully he'll be able to succeed. Okay? They put it on a coach. They send him off to Rome. It's more than a day's trip. He stops off at an inn. And the innkeeper wasn't a Jew. He was a heathen, a bad person. And they realized that he has something special in this big wooden chest. And they watch in the backyard. He goes on the QT and he's going to sleep, he's burying the chest. So if he's burying that chest, there must be something very valuable in that chest. So while Nochem Ish Gamzu was in the inn, this innkeeper and his family go out and they unearth the chest, open it up, and it's filled with jewels and gold and silver. What do? They empty it and they fill it with earth, with dirt. Put it back. Next day, Nochem Ish Gamzu takes the chest out of the ground, puts it back on his coach, going to Rome. Comes to Rome. He's introduced as the representative of the Jewish people. and they take out this ornate chest, open it up, it's filled with dirt. The emperor thought it'd be filled with jewels and gold and silver. The emperor sees this, becomes enraged. You Jews, and you can imagine the language he used about the Jewish people. You come and you disgrace me publicly. Bring me a chest of dirt. You will immediately be put to death, and the Jewish people, it'll even be worse for them. Immediately, Eliyahu Navi comes as a member of the Roman Senate, and he speaks up, and he says, Master, don't be so hasty. The dirt in that box may be valuable than all the jewels and gold in the world. Because you remember in the Bible, there was a story that when Abraham, the forefather of the Jewish people, went to war against the four mightiest kings, how did he defeat these kings? He took the dirt and he threw it at the enemy, and the dirt became arrows and spears. And that's how he defeated the four mightiest kings. He says, maybe that earth in the box is the miracle earth of Abraham. So the emperor says, okay, we're going to try it out. There were provinces which the Roman legions couldn't conquer. And he says, you know something? And he was every day they were losing men in battle, and we can't succeed in conquering them. We're going to take this box of dirt, send it out there. We'll test it on the battlefield. If it works, this man is a hero. If it doesn't work, he will be killed and the Jews are going to be dealt with. Sure enough, they send it to the battlefield. Miracle earth. They vanquish the enemy. They conquer those provinces. Nochamish Gamzu is a hero. They filled the box with diamonds and gold and jewels, even more so. Annul the decree, send them back. Okay? The innkeeper, you realized, never thought this guy's coming back again after they sent him over the box of earth. So he comes back and they said, what happened? He says, you don't realize the earth that was in that box is miracle earth. So what do? They fill up a wagon load of the backyard earth and they're off to Rome. The innkeeper, his wife, his kids, they're going to be the heroes. And they come to the courtier over there. He says, by the way, we know you had a box of earth that came from our backyard. We came with a whole wagon load of it. The emperor is excited. They take the earth, send it out to the front. They're all killed in battle. And that was the end of the innkeeper and his wife and family. That's the Gemara. Nochamish Gamzu. Gamzu Latova. Never faced. I'm in the hands of God. Whatever it is, it's God's world. What God wants, that gives me contentment. Because as long as I'm filling my value, so when you accept the yoke of heaven and you see that straight line and you're not distracted, you can appreciate even what it means to die for God, what it means to put out for God, to give 50% of your assets to charity. But you know, you go on a vacation. But understanding, because that's God's own, who is God? Giving charity has greater value than padding my own pocket. But how do you appreciate that? It doesn't make sense. You Jews are out of your mind. Yeah, Gates, he has $100 billion. He gives $20 billion out to charity. Okay. And how do you make the 20 billion? The 100 billion. Okay, different story. But a person who doesn't have that much, and he takes 10%, 20%, gives it to tzedakah. I use the word charity, philanthropy. And he feels that he's the beneficiary. Not because he's being rewarded, but rather because he understands the value of that. But that's because if you have the Ol Malchus Shamayim, you have the yoke and you see it straight, and you don't have the distraction, you have the level of appreciation to appreciate what that is. I'm going to stop here today, and we'll entertain just a few comments.